Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to Point Reyes Books, incredible bookstore out here on the West Coast that I'm sure that many of the people here in our audience have probably visited, have some connection to. It is a lovely place. So I begin there with gratitude to Stephen and Point Reyes Books. I also have gratitude to the contributors who are here with us tonight. Aaron, Lillian, Art, Enrique, Curt, Diane, Lisa, and Devon. You're going to hear from them just a little bit later. You're going to hear from me first. I'd just like to provide a little bit of framing. And I would also like to express some gratitude for the billions of years of life processes that resulted in us being able to be here at this moment in time. So my name is Gavin Van Horn. I work for the Center for Humans and Nature. We're the publishers of the Kinship series, the 5 volumes that I hope many of you have. It's not required to be part of this book club, but I hope many of you have been able to dip into one or more of these volumes and to read one of these wonderful contributors. So I'm coming to you currently from the greening hills, a super surprise for me for wintertime to see hills get green in San Luis Obispo, California. It's a place of live oaks, volcanic moros, coyotes, crows, Anna's hummingbirds, and sea otters. And it's also the lands of the Chumash peoples who lived and tended this area into such an abundant place. So a little bit of an origin story for the books in terms of the themes that we were really honing in on when we put this series, this Kinship series together. One major thing was the concept of personhood, that it extends beyond the human, that there are non-human persons all around us. We wanted to look at that. We wanted to have people tell stories about the ways that they interact with non-human persons. The second thing, and I'm really happy that Enrique Salmon is with us tonight because he provided a major sort of inspiration for this series when he discussed in an article, I think all the way back in 2000 or 2001, Enrique, he talked about kincentric ecology. And you know, just to paraphrase it, I hope I do it justice, Enrique, but you know, the idea is that we are surrounded by these relatives, these kin, plants, animals, living, the living world around us, and that as we interact and work with those other species, that we can actually become keystone species in our landscapes, that human beings can make areas more biodiverse, not less biodiverse, and that the rituals and the memories and the cultural stories that surround those other creatures creates a kincentric ecology. And the third thing then is is that we live in a world of subjects. What Robin Wall Kimmer, one of the co-editors, along with myself and John Hausdorfer, has called key, a pronoun that doesn't reduce the world to objects, that is it's, that we are in a world of living beings. And the simple way of saying that is the world is alive. And that's what these books are all about. So given that the world is alive, how do we better engage, respond to, practice with, raise our awareness of the lives of all these living beings that surround us, both individually and collectively. So first, this idea was just, it started out as thinking about one book, but then soon it sort of fruited into 5 different mushrooms, if you will, out of the same mycelial network of things. And so as editors, we had to think about how do we want to organize this material. And it made most sense to us to do it by scale, from the macro to the micro. So we began with the planet in our first volume. Tonight we'll be talking about place, and the thing about this volume, I think, that is interesting is that, we sometimes talk about ourselves as earthlings, and that's all well and good, but I like this phrase, placelings, because really our experiences, our most sort of immediate experiences, our most intimate relationships happen in the places where we are. We can think abstractly and can be grateful for that ability to scale up or look at the world from a bird's eye point of view, but we are shaped and shaped by the places, the watersheds that we live in, and the places that we come to call home. So last month we began with volume 1, and now we're going to be talking about volume 2. Next month we're gonna head into volume 3 and do this until May, the second Wednesday of every month. And if you want those dates, you can check the Point Reyes Books calendar. They have all that information there. So every volume about kinship, really, no matter if it's planet, place, partners, persons, or practice, which are the 5 volumes, is really about confronting the myth of separation. And as you'll see today, place is a tangle of kinship relationships. And not all of those kinships are pleasant. I'm glad we have Lillian with us today because her essay is about community in Australia and the effects of lead mining on that community. And that's a complicated form of kinship. So place involves reckoning with those things, and it involves healing. In my own essay in this volume, which happened to be in this particular volume, I talk about the feeling of orphanhood, not in terms of my immediate family, but in terms of my relationship with the land, about growing up in an area that had been broken, that was the subject of violent colonization and conquest. And that's a history that I grapple with in that essay. And part of that healing is learning how to listen, learning how to belong to the land. I think the land wants us back. It wants us in reciprocity. It wants its children. So place, these lands and waters that define our sense of identity and tell us who we are invested and infused with stories that are personal, communal, and cultural. We're placelings. So I'm looking forward to hearing from folks that are with us tonight that contributed to these volumes. And the way that we're going to do this, just so you're aware, if you weren't at the last kinship gathering here on our Zoom call, is I'm going to have each of our contributors introduce themselves and then read a very short passage from their essay. And I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to hear people read in their own voice, their own words. And I know it was powerful for me last time, and I'm looking forward to this experience now. And then I'll follow up with a short question for each person, and then we'll open it up to you all who are here on this call and hear what's on your mind, what questions you have for our contributors. So if something comes up for you during the course of their readings, please, write it down, put it in the chat. I'm going to have Stephen do a little monitoring for me to see what kind of questions I can pitch out to our contributors after they're done reading. So with that, let's get into it. Thank you so much again for being here. And Lisa, we are going to begin with you. If you could just introduce yourself and then read from your work.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gavin, and thank you, Stephen, and thank you, all of you who have come tonight. I feel very honored and delighted to be here with all of you and with these panelists. I was really moved reading all these different essays and the tenderness of connections to all these different places. I think seeing all of you here, knowing that those places are represented today, is moving to me. I'm coming from Quito. I live right on the flanks of the volcano Huayllapichincha. I am the daughter of medical missionaries, and so I have this strange luck, strange providence to have been born on the flanks of this volcano. And then I was raised in the Ecuadorian Amazon, on the banks of the Rio Pastaza, in a military town that was named for Shell oil. And so my life is kind of woven through all these sort of colonial and neo-post-colonial stories. But I love that my essay was included in the series of place, because I am so strongly formed by place. And I think as I grew up and as through my life, I've so strongly identified with place. It took me a while to sort of connect to people. I was more strongly connected to the places that raised me. And so I feel very honored to be here tonight. Ecuador is one of those most biodiverse places on the planet, and it goes from the Galapagos Islands as part of who we are. It goes from the oceans all the way up to Chimborazo, which is one of the highest points on the planet. And so I think a lot about evolution and what it means, especially right now. This moment where we're all called, here we are on this planet together at this moment in time, and we are called to evolve. And so I think about that a lot and what it means to evolve together in community as a species. So I'm just going to read a little bit about that. Ecuador is also the first country in the world to declare the rights of nature in our constitution. And so that's something that's very dear and important to us. So I'm going to read about that. So in the Constitution, in Article 71, it states that nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and realized, must be respected for its inherent right to existence, including the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles, structures, functions, and evolving processes. And I find this very moving, that one of the aspects that was recognized was nature's right to evolve and the right to transform. For this is where I find hope and comfort and the power of evolution in the beak of the finch. We cannot evolve in a vacuum. We evolve in cross-personal, cross-cultural, and cross-creature contact. We evolve through extraordinary bonds of empathy and enmity, and exchanges of appreciation and frustration, in responses to curiosity and fear. We live in a pulsing web of relation, attracting and repelling. We evolve in an ongoing exchange of blessings and curses, and positive and negative interactions, along with other kinds. We evolve through ingenuity, through creativity, flexibility, cooperation, and kinship. And we evolve through competition and trickery, domination, predation, and fear. When I think about evolution and what it might mean for human beings, I'm compelled by the ways that creatures survive, adapt, and evolve through the ingenious powers of their creative solutions, often through their ability to reach across the species divide and cooperate with another kind. The traits that propel natural selection include survival of the creative, survival of the cooperative, survival of the welcoming, survival of the bridge builders, survival of the observant, survival of the seductive, survival of the inclusive, survival of the artistic, survival of the resilient, survival of the strategic, survival of the flexible, survival of the colorful, survival of the transparent, survival of the musical, survival of the fragrant, survival of the generous, survival of the impervious, survival of the ingenious, survival of the bold, survival of the shy. Through the expression of our diverse and astounding gifts, we adapt, transform, and evolve communally in relation to the living land and all living things. Each of us plays our part in this collective transformation. Our web of relations spins the world together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I love the idea of evolution and kinship being propelled by so much more than just survival of the fittest, and that passage really speaks to that. So you're a generous bridge builder yourself, survival of the bridge builders, and one thing you've helped me understand a little bit more is how deeply Ecuador has imprinted itself in your consciousness in your body. So I wonder if you would just tell us a little bit more about how Ecuador itself informs your sense of kinship, or maybe the mountains that you've told me about.
Yeah, that's a very strong question. I feel deeply embedded and connected to this place. Ecuador is a place where when I get in a taxi cab, people always think I'm from someplace else. I do not look Ecuadorian. I don't, nobody would identify me as an Ecuadorian here. And growing up, I'd always sort of fight with taxi drivers, saying I'm from here, and I'd go into this long thing about, I was conceived here and my body was from this land. And I know that my genes are from someplace else, but this place made me who I am. And I always carry this place when I go away. There's this longing that I have in the Amazon too. One of these places so intensely biodiverse. You learn about how we are all interconnected, and you learn to make connections in different ways. I think it's shaped the way my brain works. All the places shape who we are. And the mountains here during this time, the mountains are considered alive. They have family relationships. Wawa Pichinchas, that's right here, is the son of Isabella Tungurahua, who is this seductive, beautiful volcano who has all these sort of affairs and relationships with Chimborazo and Cotopaxi. And so there's this notion that these mountains have this seductive life. And these mountains, it's interesting, are people are allied to these mountains. Different communities here, indigenous communities, are raised by the mountains and dress according to the mountains, and they're from these mountains. And the mountains are considered to be jealous, I think, which is also interesting. There's this idea that one has an allyship or alliance with these mountains, and the mountains are jealous if you go, away too far from your mountain. And during the pandemic, what has been so powerful to me is just, I live on the fourth story of an apartment building, and I watch Pichincha every day. And I do sort of fast films of Pichincha in the morning and in the evening. And I feel deeply accompanied by this mountain. It helps me, it orients me, they orient me and help me gain perspective. And I just feel deeply loyal and accompanied by this mountain. I don't know how to say it any other way, that this mountain saved my life, I think, in many ways during this time.
Mm. Yeah, I remember you once sent me a video of what seemed to be the volcano breathing, the sounds that were being made, and that I'd never really seen anything like that before. It kind of brought home that very much that respiration of a mountain to me. It was incredible. So we're going to head over to Enrique Salmon now. Enrique, why don't you introduce yourself and read us a little something?
Kureba, Teraba, Mehe Ramuri, Mehe Taraipame, Chomari, Samati, Okeleveya. I'm Enrique Salmon. I'm Ramuri. I am Parrot Clan. My name, Taraipame Chomari, means he runs along with the deer over there. And I'm a professor of American Indian Studies over here in Chochenyo Ohlone country in San Leandro, California, the Bay Area. I teach at California State University, East Bay. I'm the tribal liaison for our campus as well. So I get an opportunity to work a lot with our local indigenous communities. I wanted to add what Gavin mentioned earlier about where this idea of concentric ecology came from. It was actually from, like Gavin mentioned, he wrote an article in 2000, but before that I had been engaged in a lot of deep conversations with an old friend of mine, he's Pena, Dennis Martinez, and we have been going back and forth trying to find ways to express what it means to be an Indigenous person in this limited English language. And we finally agreed, because we were getting ready to present at the Ecological Society of America conference together, about how Indigenous communities are keystone species in their local landscapes. It's not an accident that in the most biodiverse regions of the world, we find Indigenous communities maintaining their traditional land management practices. And then Dennis and I were talking, and we were agreeing again that it's, this ecological approach that Indigenous people take is a result of recognizing that we share our whole being, or as I say in the things I've written, our breath, with every living thing around us, not just living things, but everything around us. They are our kin. And that's where we came up with this concentricity. And that evolved into concentric ecology, because how we believe impacts and influences our practices and the choices we make on the landscapes. And so I'm going to read a short part from my contribution. And this comes from an experience I had in my homeland, which is down in the Sierra Madres in Chihuahua, Mexico. There's about 70,000 of my people still there, maintaining our land management practices. When my dentist friend spoke about my heart being rooted in the landscape of the Sierra Tarahumara, he connected directly with what it means to be Raramuri. We feel that it is our duty, our responsibility as human beings to honor the land through ceremony in order to maintain the proper cycles of all life. This is because we understand that everything around us is a direct relative. When we breathe out, our iwi, our soul, our breath, is inhaled by all life. Conversely, when we inhale the iwi of everything around us, we are in constant kinship with all life and it with us. We belong to it and it to us. This feeling of belonging runs deep for Indigenous people. It is practically genetic.
Thank you, Enrique. Could you say a little bit more about what honoring the land through ceremony, how honoring the land through ceremony is part of maintaining kinship relationships?
Well, a lot of it is about, it's in contrast to so much of how so many modern human beings, no matter whether or not they are from Western Europe or can trace their lineage to Western Europe, so many modern human beings' worldview, their base metaphor is based on ideas from Western Europe, which implies that the earth was created once and it was put here for us. Okay. And for Indigenous people, it's not quite that. We feel that the land, this earth, this place, all these places were not put here for us. Our consciousness evolved with them. We emerged into these places that were already here. We do not decide if places are sacred or powerful. They already are in and among themselves. Such a different contrast. And so a part of that recognition is that it is our responsibility. This is so different again to Western European approaches, which is based on rights. for Indigenous peoples is based on it's our responsibility to ensure that the creation continues, because we are constantly in this sort of dynamic creation. It wasn't just created once, it's always ongoing. And we are a part of that. And the way we honor that and we respect that and ensure that that continues is through ceremony. It doesn't matter which community it is. If it's Hopi, they have to make sure they keep doing their various ceremonial calendar, because if they stop, everything else stops. We make sure we keep our Datuburi and Yumari ceremonies going, because it's our responsibility to make sure that the land, the Gawiwachi, as we refer to it in our language, the place of nurturing, maintains its health. And we have to ensure that through ritual, through ceremony. The sun dances and the plains are a part of that. And no matter what tribe, indigenous community we can think about around the world, it's the same thing. I remember being in Arnhem on the top end in Australia and talking to native folks there, and they said almost the exact same thing. And I remember being again in Arnhem, and I was going to go visit these 40,000-year-old rock art, and these deep overhangs. And before we could do that, one of the local elders had to introduce us to the land, and he did that by introducing us to the bees. And we literally had to go to this nearby creek, and he scooped water up from the creek and put it in his mouth, and then he sprayed it all over us, because through that way we were in connection now with everything there, with the insects, the bees. And then we were ready to look at this incredible rock art. And I remember talking to him later on, he was saying, yeah, that's our responsibility. We got to make sure we stay in constant connection, this constant ritual, this constant ceremony. That's how we make sure this creation continues.
Well, yeah, that difference between rights and responsibilities, that's worth reflecting on. Maybe we can circle back when we open things up. But speaking of Australia, we have our very own Lillian Pearce from Australia, and in a beautiful setting. Lillian, why don't you share with us?
Thanks, Gavin, and hello, everybody. I hope the wind and the beautiful ocean storm that's coming in doesn't interrupt too much, but I think it's better than the loud children inside. So I want to start by thanking Gavin and Robin and John for being involved in this amazing collection of writing. And I'm on holiday today on the beautiful and unceded lands of the Gulidjan and Kadawanut people of the region of what is today called Cape Otway in southwest Victoria. So I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and convey our gratitude for the time here in the abundant river, estuary and beach country with koalas, king parrots and wallabies in our close proximity. I also want to acknowledge that I live on the Taungurung lands in central Victoria, and recognise how lucky we are to be there and to care for the 9 acres of land, garden and wildlife that is our home. Thinking about Gavin's question about place, there's a phrase that Canadian Zita Cobb said in 2012 that I came across, that is, you belong where you give yourself. And that's been a really beautiful guide for me as particularly as I've settled into a new phase of my life that involves less travel and more commitment to a particular place. And I think that comes across in so many registers, including the generosity and vulnerability, but also the labor and care that we give of ourselves to the places that we belong to and that belong to us and become our responsibility. But thinking about what Lisa was saying, I also I feel that sense of the calling and yearning, and I think sometimes places choose us as well, and that being receptive to that when you visit places can also create these beautiful relationships that do shape your life and stay close even if you're geographically far away. So I'm an environmental studies scholar and writer with a background in ecology and a PhD in environmental history. And I work at La Trobe University in their Centre for the Study of the Inland. And I also work at the University of Tasmania. But today I'm going to read a little excerpt from the piece that I wrote about Wilyakalli and Barkindji country, a long, long way from here in far west arid New South Wales. The Australian crust is rarely active, often exposed to high temperatures and relatively isolated, meaning its soils are ancient, dry, and nutrient poor. It's difficult to imagine rocks and soil as lively kin when timescales operate so incongruously with the human experience. But sometimes, especially when disturbed, minerals assert their agency and demand kinship. They migrate down rivers, drift across borders, seep into flesh, and settle in our bones. They scribe the extractive history of a place into bodies through neurological interruption, developmental deformity, and corrosive powers, weaving themselves into intergenerational futures. It's a small cost, the powerful argue, a cost that individuals must bear. It's a slow violence for which none can be truly held accountable. There is agency to something seemingly as stable as rock, the transience and mobility of the mineral terra that supports all life. The rocks tell a story that call out deviant kinships, the inequalities of power, and the shirking of responsibility that pervades mining communities.
Lillian. I want to circle that phrase, deviant kinships, that you used there. You mentioned the agency of the rocks and the minerals demanding a hearing. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking about this in the context of how there have been phases of a kind of speaking back from the Australian country ecosystem to the violent and extractive settler colonial practices. So like North America, you know, we've had extreme dust storms, we've had wild erosion, we've had mass terraforming of changing of watersheds and country. And I think when deviant kinship comes in, it's not just the legacies of those histories, but it's then also the layering of the toxicity that is created through practices like mining. And so that agency and the relationship that we're bound into with the world also becomes
Cut out a little bit there.
Repeatedly. Oh, sorry. The dust
That's
is
all right.
speaking repeatedly.
Yeah, the agency of the land.
But it's in a different way. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, it's these deviant kinships, the unruly heritage. It's a term and a phrase that's used that I feel is really powerful as well. That often it's the element of a place that is so unique to that sense of place and to that community as well. It's not something that is necessarily an evil or an other. It's part of a culture and a society and a community that are often kind of very much entwined with these practices. And the results of that become part of cellular structures. You know, they cross placental boundaries, and they become part of our inheritance, whether we like that or not. Yeah,
that so comes through in your essay, the way that the story, the way that the people embrace the story, the way that you know, that landscape shapes their bodies and their narratives, and you know, in some communities can become a point of pride, a point of you know, that sense of home and that sense of place is shaped by that. But it's a complicated story, and I'm really glad that you told it in these books. So I want to turn now to Mr. Aaron Abeyta and hear from him from our Southern Colorado neighbor.
Out of this, Gavin. Good to see everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight, and just wonderful company, even though we're on Zoom. but all across the world. And anyway, just real honor to be here tonight. I'm from Antonito, Colorado. I'm the 7th of 9 generations. Pretty much everything I write about, everything I live on a daily basis is connected to my heart home, which is Antonito. And I've dedicated my entire adult life to loving the thing, which also feels like the thing that ultimately will kill me, but in a good way, in a way where essentially I will give of myself over and over again to make my hometown a little bit better. And I think that's the process of writing for me anyway. In this particular piece, it's kind of coincidental, fortuitous that I'm reading it on January 12th, which is my daughter's birthday. And she's the central character in this piece. And we adopted her from Ethiopia about 10 years ago. Some of you have met her. And shortly after we adopted her, we took one of those National Geographic DNA tests, and it came back and it said that, my wife's family was from the Ethiopian Rift Valley 60,000 years ago. And our 5-year-old daughter turned to us and she asked, did they know me? And that's what made me write this piece. Her protectors followed her to Antonito. They crossed oceans with her. They lived beside her, guided her, there in that house that looked east on a high hill overlooking Denver and golden to the east. Perhaps it was the hands of her ancient kin, their voices guiding her, telling her where to hoard the crust of bread, where to hide dog food and crackers to eat later, when the hunger was beyond what many can or will ever imagine. There were 3 of them, spirit protectors that must have told her when no one was looking, so she could steal bits of food from the plates of her so-called family. This, then, is kin. Kin not of blood necessarily, but of time, of longing, of human necessity. And these, all of them, these spirits are your family, the word upon the soul's ear that is made kin.
I know only a little bit about your amazing daughter, Aaron, but I want to focus in on that last line and ask you about kinship not being defined by genetics. How does it transcend bloodlines for you?
Kin will heal all the broken parts of you, even if you've never met them before. But when you meet them, you feel healed instantly. And I won't go too far into the weeds with this, but essentially, my wife and I were broken in numerous ways that we didn't even know how to necessarily even talk about, much less address. And then one day we get a call, literally out of the blue, from a complete stranger. And a few days later, we're meeting her on January 8th, 2012. And she peeks out over the railing from the second story of the home she was living in. And we knew instantly that we were healed. We knew instantly that we loved her. And it's pretty amazing, honestly. I can only describe it as true love. I'm assuming some of us have felt that way before when you meet that right person. And there's this Bible verse, and I don't want to go there necessarily, but when we met her, but the thought that came to me, para sanar los corazones heridos, to heal our wounded souls, to heal our wounded hearts. And so it's perfect. And so, yeah, that's Mahita in a nutshell. She's pretty amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Antonito, the town itself of Antonito, like I've come to know that place through your writing. I've never seen somebody dignify both the brokenness and the beauty of a place with such honesty and grace. So thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. It's a constant choral of love.
Right, right.
Thank
So,
you.
sure. Let's head over to Diane up in Minnesota.
Hamatakiapi, Diane Wilson Amakiapia, Bede Wakantuan Oyate Hamatahaya, Sichangu Oyate Eromawapia. Hello, all my relatives. My name's Diane Wilson. I am a descendant of the Bede Wakantuan Oyate, and I'm enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation. And it's such an honor to be here tonight with all of you. And Aaron, that was such a touching, beautiful story.
Well,
So
thank you.
I'm just, this is just, I'm just so grateful, Gavin, for the invitation to be part of this volume and to be here tonight. And so I have actually worked for many years with Native organizations in food sovereignty, especially around indigenous seeds. That is one of the great passions of my life. But I've worked primarily with community. So it was always thinking about things on a broader scale, and how can we return these beautiful seeds as foods for our community. But I've reached that point now in my life and my work where I really want to understand my relationship to the place where I live, meaning the 10 acres in Minnesota, just north of the Twin Cities, where I live on land that was once part of a farm, that is disturbed land where cattle used to graze. And yet there is a tamarack bog that is a remnant of a very old ecosystem that has been present on this land as well. And the fact that I am at this time the steward for this bog means that I feel this connection back to my ancestors who would have been part of this landscape as it was. And so what I have been trying to do in this in my life and in this essay is to rethink my relationship then on this piece of land as the person who is here for whatever time I have. How can I leave this place better than the way it was when I came here? And to think through those relationships with the plants that are here now, to understand the story of this land, and then to do whatever I can and to relearn those principles of how we live in balance with a piece of land in which we are a guest. And so that's really the focus of my essay, in particular, a plant called prickly ash, in which I have a very conflicted relationship, even though I understand that it's my teacher in this work. And so I'm going to read just a very brief excerpt from my essay. When violence was first used to conquer this land, we suffered devastating harm to the earth, our children, and ultimately our identities as Native people. From generations who suffered through boarding schools, who could not keep their children safe, we inherited their fear. The imprint of this generation's old trauma was triggered by the rapid, violent clearing of my land. My response rose from the legacy of my family's defense of silence. But the story needn't end there. Through the strength of our ancestors, we also inherited seeds, prayer, ceremony, language, courage, resilience, hope. The knowledge that we seek is still here within reach. As I learned when visiting the Standing Rock encampment that challenged the Dakota Access Pipeline, it is our responsibility as Indigenous people to protect what we love, whether that is water, our sacred first medicine, or our seeds who give life, or our children who are the future. When we stumble, when we give into fear or despair, when we fail to act, what we can do is plant a garden. The simple gesture of planting a seed reconnects us to an ancient relationship. It is a reminder that we are loved, all of us. In turn, we must also love and care for our relatives, all of them.
Thank you, Diane. I remember when reading your essay that it was that relationship with the trees, that the stories that you told about those trees that really stood out to me. And I know that, fear and despair can be a part of, our lives. So I was wondering if you might say how those trees have provided some of those seeds of reconnection that you're speaking to in this passage.
Well, the tamarack bog that I mentioned is a stand of very old tamaracks. And to me, they're one of the most beautiful, magical trees that I've met. And so to have that privilege of living on a place where there is this very old habitat, this original habitat, to me is such a blessing and such a gift that I get to have this time with these trees and learn whatever it is in my own humble and in my quest for understanding, whatever I can learn in my time here and then pass that knowledge on, then that to me would be just a tremendous gift. And it's just a privilege to be near these trees. And so I feel a huge responsibility to figure out how to take care of them before the world around us encroaches so much that we actually lose this habitat at last.
Well, I'm glad that you're there to do that. And I mean, all of us sort of, that's one of the things about place, right? Is we can reconnect in the backyard, or, when I lived in the Chicago area, I'd say oftentimes the relationships go from the balcony to the bioregion, So thank you for doing that work and for putting forward that work of reconnection. Devon, we are going to turn to you, my friend.
Gracias, thank you. It's been an amazing experience to be here with you all tonight. I'm very grateful to you all and to Robin, Gavin, and John for putting this together, the Kinship book series and this event tonight. I'm in San Luis, Colorado, in the Acequia Hood, not far from Abeyta. We're only about 30 miles apart. He's on the western side of the Rio Bravo del Norte, and I'm on the eastern side. He's by the San Juan Mountains, and I'm over by the Shining Mountains, as the Ute people named them. They're called the Sangre de Cristo. I'm visiting with you tonight from Nuche, Diné, Antigua ancestral territory, also Chicano land grant territory, and Genizareki's families here are about 1/3 of our community. So I was thinking before I do my little reading about some of the things that have been said that really resonate with me. And I actually wanted to start, Gavin, with another book that you co-edited with John Hausdorfer on wildness. The Wildness Project was an amazing contribution as well that you all put together. And in my chapter in that book, it's called The Hummingbird and the Redcap. I think you might recall that. And I was doing one of my first hikes in the Southern Rockies. I grew up in Laredo, Texas, as you know, if you read my chapter for this book. And I had never seen a hummingbird. And so I was backpacking up Mount Venable, above the Baca campus in the northern part of this valley by Crestone, Colorado. And I kept being buzzed by something, and I got scared. I thought it was a wasp, because we have these giant red wasp in Laredo, where I grew up, on the another part of the Rio Grande bioregions. And so I ran away and I hid behind this massive boulder. And then looking up from there, I noticed that it was a hummingbird. And I'm told that it wasn't a ruby-throated, which is what I wrote, but actually it's probably a rufous. But in any event, I later learned that that rock was a crestone conglomerate, and it's known as part of a family of giant-sized boulders that we call glacial erratics. And I was thinking about how there's a thread for my thinking and my work between the Wildness book and the Kinship book, of the idea that indigenous peoples are like glacial erratics. We've been lifted up by the ice, the cold, icy hands of neoliberal settler colonial capitalism, torn apart from where we're from and dumped over here in some other place. But we're still here and we're holding our ground. And we're very hard to move away once we've settled in this erratic way. And so that's what this work is about in the Kinship chapter that I wrote. It's about how we continue to survive. The title of my chapter is Borders, Edges, and Shifting Mosaics on Kinship in Walled States. And we are a walled state. So I'm going to read a couple of phrases from the second paragraph and from the last paragraph. Growing up in the Mezquital landscape of the Tamaulipas Desert in South Texas meant learning to work, live, play, and pray amid the edges of cacti patches, mesquite and sweet acacia groves, buffalo grass prairies, and the occasional peyote mounds nesting in shade underneath the islands and hedgerows of nopalitos. In this arid landscape, walking along creeks and their edges was a daily activity. They awaken in me a sense of place that offer refuge. In my youth, these were cool spaces where I blankly contemplated my affinity with water bugs, turtles, salamanders, and other critters. The edge, created by a creek or a river, is not like a human-made border. It is an edge that attracts. It does not repel or try to keep anything out. It blends and it mixes. Those of us who are liminal arrivants in new lands with genealogical ties to indigenous families exist at the edges of tribal and settler status. And yet we are not simply arrivants. The healing power of daily lived ritual and ceremonial practices connects us to ancestral sources and is a subversive enactment of indigenous ethnoscientific knowledge and place-based ethics. This involves cohabiting edges and transgressing borders by indigenizing the ethics of relationality. We need to become aware that we are edge dwellers rather than simply transgressors of someone else's borderlands. This includes the borders invented by self-anointed identity police and ideologues who represent a misguided deployment of the settler colonial logic of quantized determinations of indigeneity, which reflects this whole notion of a geneticization of indigeneity. Finally, I also just want to say in closing, because something Lillian talked about, deviant kinship, the agency of the rocks, of the landscape itself. And again, I have to refer back to the glacial erratics. The glacial erratic exists because of the agency of the earth. It is, if agency is the transformation of the world, of the environment, then certainly the landscape itself can speak for itself and teach us what it means to be a human in relation with all living beings, including the landscape. Mocto, gracias.
Thank you so much, Devon. Beautiful. I mean, this is all about edges and the richness of those edges. So I was wondering maybe if you could point out how your sense of place has been shaped by that kind of edge dwelling.
Well, you, in a way, have to start with the cultural and environmental history of this bioregion. As I mentioned earlier, in fact, one of my young students who's in our Milpa Molino Collaborative, it's a co-op of community farmers growing food for the community. His mother is Arapaho. She's enrolled in the Arapaho Nation, and his father is Chicano, and he's being raised by his grandmother here, who is from a Genízaro family. These were the descendants of the enslaved. And for a very long time, there have been divisions in this community like other ones, including Antonito, which has a very sizable Genízaro population itself. People call them descendants of slaves. That's wrong. They were descendants of the enslaved. They're not slaves. There's a big difference. And in recognizing this, I realized that some of the edges and divisions that we have to negotiate that are inscribed in the memory of the cultural landscape here have to do with painful memories and injustices and violations against our relations. And although most of the Genízaro family descendants have been part of this community, liberated, emancipated a long time ago from the status as enslaved, there are still class divisions and even racial divisions. We have a very problematic edge here. And I know that Aron has actually written and thought about this as well. And that is the edge between the so-called Spanish American and the indigenous people of who identify as Chicano. And that's one of the most difficult edges to negotiate, because in the end, people of Mexican origin include not just the descendants of Genízaros here. My mayordomo, our ranch foreman, is Purepecha from Michoacan. He married an 8th generation Chicana Genízara. So those edges transgress borders, and that's why I think about us as border, transgressing borders and being edge dwellers rather than just arrivants in somebody else's borderlands. And we don't usually think, especially in the context of a reflection on place, about how this place has become inscribed by these social and cultural political relationships that have changed who gets to own the land, who gets the best water rights, and all the rest. So it is very much a coupling together in a very uncomfortable, painful way of social and ecological systems.
Thank you for that. And I hope you continue to be visited by the red cap, the hummingbird, and continue to listen as you have and to express those stories.
They come a long way, all the way from Chiapas and even further south.
Yeah, it's great. Those
Just like
kinships,
butterfly.
geographical kinships that help us think about the way that these places are connected. All right, Art, our resident poet tonight, please share with us.
So I'm a member of the Union of Mountain Poets, the Jack Mueller Brigade, and a lifelong student of our wise woman in the San Juan Range, Dolores LaChapelle. I live on an edge, the cusp of the Colorado Plateau and the Southern Rockies. It's the ancestral homeland of the Nooch, the Ute people, our neighbors on 3 sovereign reservations in our region. And according to some, the legendary part of the home of Atzlan. I have some Chicano ex-ancestors that I honor as well. I caretake a couple acres looking south to Lone Cone, our seductive mountain, as Elisa would say, on Wrights Mesa, in the headwaters of Maverick Draw. Both Aaron and Devon have been participants in this wonderful conference, Headwaters Conference in Gunnison, that we all share. The headwaters of Maverick Draw lead as a tributary to the mighty Colorado. So that's where I am. And I want to read a poem that we did for the Planet Drum Foundation. I don't know how many of you know the bioregional connections that Peter Berg and Judy Goldhaft have set up with the Planet Drum Foundation for many, many years. I've been a participant in the bioregional movement. So one of the books that came out of that was Re-inhabiting a Separate Country. And so re-inhabitation, going to a place and instead of colonizing it, re-inhabiting it as immigrants. I spent the first night alone in the abandoned house, dropping acid, to see what I could see outside myself. And I've spent the past 40 years inside this acre of irrigated wetlands, learning Itke's quandaries, how poplars gnawed down to the roots by deer grow stronger, survive the drought that kills the cherry tree. How native lacewings, encouraged in their spidery nests, love to feed on Canada thistle, and how some weeds harvested before flowering and soaked in drums of pond water make the stinkiest, best compost tea. Each spring, each fall, wind before the clouds, whipping at the roofs, tossing gusts and ghastly turns, a neighbor crushed in her truck cab by a snapped cottonwood on the highway. I've even learned the litany of locals who call this place home. Mex Snyder, Carolyn Young, Ed and Grandma Foster, planting rhubarb, tending goats. And now, paid for twice, Cloud Acres been mine to husband. Siberian elms, coyote willow, 49 varieties of heirloom spuds grown to seed. 2 once small children, 2 grown and long gone children, flocks of geese, red-winged blackbirds, the occasional great blue heron. Listening to this one place, it keys names, it keys moods, it keys whispers. Listening has taught me more about earth kinning and the land's deepening wisdoms than any text.
Thank you so much, Art. I love how you name both the humans and the non-humans, and the specificity of it is wonderful. Listening, how have you learned to be a better listener? Art?
That's hard. I was named after an uncle who was famous for talking loudly, and being a little man with a rather foraging mind, I tend to talk loud and a lot. And being in the wilderness, in the wild, in the natural systems itself, along with all these other creatures who are part of me, who become me, who reflect all those around me, I've just gotten a little bit dumber, and I dumb myself down. I listen more. I try to tune in to what I hear, not just what I hear myself saying, but what I hear the trees saying, what I hear the wonderful elms that grow here on this land that I'm at, the dragonflies that hover over the pond like patrols watching for insect mosquitoes. So in spite of living in an irrigated wetland, I hardly have any mosquitoes because there are insect allies who help me out. I wouldn't have heard that. I wouldn't have seen that if I hadn't been listening.
Over here, we also have golondrinas. The cliff swallows will really eat up those skitters. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that was the praying mantis, I'd heard about them, and I'd seen them actually in other places, but after spending time out in my acre, which has a willow car being a forest of willows, I've seen these praying mantis. They're amazing. And yeah, the predatory and the prey, the symbionts, we all are in this dance on the land, and it's wonderful to be part of that dance.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's, I hate to move things along, but I must. And let's get to our last contributor for tonight. Dr. Curt Meine, take us away.
Thank you, Gavin. And wow, I'm so honored to be in this collection and to be among all my remarkable Zoom mates here. So Gavin gave us an assignment to choose a few lines, and I really had a hard time with it because it was difficult to take anything out of context in my contribution. My little piece is a story of allyship in the cause of biocultural restoration. But that story is embedded within a 25-year-long backstory, which is embedded within still older layers of story that go back to the Pleistocene and beyond. Devon, I was so appreciative of your invoking the erratics. So I'm coming to you from the edge of the driftless area of the upper Mississippi Basin. The driftless area is the area that was an island of unglaciated territory. In fact, it's almost defined by the lack of erratics, or it's actually the edge beyond which the erratics can no longer be found because the glaciers didn't drop them there. So I'm right on the eastern edge. And I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk Nation in what is now southern Wisconsin. So my essay tells a bit of the story of a former US military site where the Ho-Chunk Nation, about 7 years ago now, was able to reclaim a portion of their homelands in a place known as Sauk Prairie. The Sauk Nation was here historically as well, in Meskwaki. For the Ho-Chunk Nation, this place is called Mawakachunk, which translates roughly as sacred earth. So my contribution to volume 2 is called Healing Sacred Earth. And before I read my few lines, I want to take a moment to acknowledge with deep gratitude many Ho-Chunk friends and colleagues, some of whom might be with us tonight, I'm not sure, but especially John Greendeer, Bill Quackenbush, Melanie Talmadge Signs, and Randy Pulma. So Pena to my Ho-Chunk friends. This land is rendered sacred by cultural memory and story, history, and intent. It is a place, however degraded and burdened by its troubled past, of continuity and renewal. Mawakachunk carries this conviction that all places, by the very fact of their existence and by the relations we honor and recognize and build, bear the sacred. In gathering these prairie seeds together, we take a small but crucial step in reestablishing our kinship ties with the plants and animals, between people and the land, between our different human communities, between all the generations behind us and all those yet to come. We consecrate the space. We make it sacred together. This morning, we all walk softly upon the land, quietly collecting minute seeds of potential prairie. But from this small piece of sacred earth, shockwaves may ripple forth. The land shakes with the power of water spirits and the cries of thunderbirds.
Thank you, Curt. It's one thing that is absolutely crystal clear in that essay is that this prairie restoration is not merely biological. And you use that word consecrate instead of, or maybe in addition to conservation, there's consecration. What's just really briefly, because I do want to turn to our folks who are here in the chat. Why is that area so culturally significant for this prairie restoration?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for pointing out those 2 points. Yeah, the word consecrate, together, to make sacred together. When I wrote that word had never registered with me in quite that way until I wrote that. And I particularly used the term biocultural restoration because that in fact is a term that Robin Kimmer and our friend Gary Paul Nadvan in particular have been really invoking strongly. Well, I'll say the first thing that pops into my head, Gavin. This little 1,800 acres of land, badly degraded and burdened with many layers of pain, is the largest piece of land that the Ho-Chunk Nation has been able to reclaim in its ancestral territory. It doesn't have a reservation. It is also the first time in American history when the US Department of Defense turned land back to a Native nation, as far as we know. So I could go on and on about the layers of cultural significance, but I'll just lay those 2 facts out there for you. It's incredibly important for our Ho-Chunk neighbors. And it's incredibly important also for the non-natives to be part of that and to recognize it and to honor it and to learn and to heal some wounds in the non-native community as well. So in landscapes of pain, we have no choice but to work together to consecrate.
Thank you so much. Gosh, just even in these brief snippets, I hope that those that are with us tonight have gotten a sense of the ways that people are healing lands and relationships all around the world. And also the very complicated layers of and stories that are interwoven into these landscapes, into these places. I know that you all have your own stories. So we don't have a lot of time here. Stephen did ask me to shut things down at 7:25, which means we really only have a few minutes here. So I'm going to jump straight into a question that he put in the chat that we weren't able to get to. This person asked, I'm wondering if any of the speakers feel called to speak to how we can reconcile the vision to make kin with or connect to the more than human world when there's so much divisiveness among our human relations. How can we build resilient human communities that extend into harmonious connection with the natural world? I think it may be challenging for those who have experienced tremendous trauma among their human kin to lean into kinship with nature. So I'm going to put that out there. The question is, with so much division among human beings, how do we then even begin to, as this person says, lean into our kinship with nature? Who would like to jump in?
Well, we only have a few minutes, so I'll be really, really quick. The word that I honed in on was resilience. And I honestly think that resilience can be taught. And so if there's a way to sum up that word, taught or teaching, I'd say the true liberation is through education and how we connect not only with our human selves, but our natural world too. So in the time allotted, that's my quick answer.
We have to be brief, these huge questions. And I see Devon is raising his hand, so maybe you'd like to add on to that.
Well, we have to think through what is this divisiveness among us. And I actually, 2 points very quickly. We don't have time for elaboration. One is, I don't think we're as divided as we are told we are. I think that the settler colonial segment that's white supremacist is a minority, but they're loud and obnoxious and ever present. And we need to understand that there's not as much divisiveness as we believe. I would be cautious, though, with the notion that resilience can be taught. It can, but I think going back to the painful landscape and what I talked about, how painful these memories are, part of what's made Indigenous people resilient is the pain, the colonization, the suffering, and the need to survive in the face of that. And so if we're going to learn how to be co-inhabitants or re-inhabitants, and we're non-native, we need to be open to the truth claims of the other, and that's not an easy task.
Or you need to teach the pain. That's my point. You got to teach the pain. You got to teach the histories that aren't necessarily brought up in the canon of academia.
Well, I think for people who are from Western European heritage, they need to remember their pain and suffering in their origin place, and kind of use that as a way of retooling their subjectivity, their sense of place. And so, and actually, I think there's a new question about that. And I think the bioregional quiz is a good place to start if you want to develop a sense of place. You answer the question, where does my water come from? What are the native languages around here? What is the native local knowledge about agriculture and ethnobotany and foraging for medicine and edible plants? All of those, where do the place names, original place names come from? And so right now, part of that is renaming places back to their indigenous names. That's why I refer to the Sangre de Cristos as the Shining Mountains. I refer to Mount Blanc as Cisnagini. and so on. And so I think, yeah, it can be learned, but it's not an easy task. And I think we need to be aware that we're not as divided as we're told to be, as that is said. So.
Would anybody else like to add
Yeah,
on
let
to
me
that?
pop in. I know Lillian wants to say something. I'll be really short, but I just have to agree with Devon. We're told that we're divided. I live. All my neighbors are most of them are Trump fans. There's a flag that flies in a town nearby that's a giant American flag flying upside down. And I remember a sign I saw on Telluride when Trump was in office, elect a clown, expect a circus. And now I go down to Madera and I see that same sign on a Trump supporter fence. So I think what is really true is that we have deep convictions. And if we start local, start with your neighbor, start with your next door neighbor. Bring over a pie to your next door neighbor. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to talk politics. I think the whole thing that kinship is about is making relationships. If we want to relate to the natural world, make relationships with those people around you as best you can. It's not going to always work, but even if it doesn't work, make that effort. That's how we lead stuff out of people, which is what education, as Aaron says, is all about. Please, Lillian.
Well, just to continue that, what I just wanted to say was really, I think that in making kinship and in taking care, we make ourselves and our communities better. You know, I think being full of care for all beings, and that doesn't necessarily need to be broken down into our human kin and our non-human kin. That if we practice these things of paying attention, of doing the important work, and of taking care, then we improve the world.
Enrique, you put your finger in the air.
I just wanted to take a different track on answering this question. It's a very important question. And I think the important thing is, for me anyway, we need to learn how to not only tell our stories, but to be open to hearing other people's stories. Because it's through story where we find connection to each other. We always find some commonality, no matter what story we're listening to. And that way, and we realize, like Devon has suggested, and I think he's correct, we're actually more connected than we are divided in this country. We just stop listening to each other's stories. We're so busy looking at our phones, and not, like Art suggested, trading pies and cookies with each other.
Yeah, and I would echo that. It's already come up tonight that kinship is built on deep listening, right? This is the thread in Art's poem, but it's a thread throughout these essays. And just want to mention that I'm paraphrasing here, but Mary Midgley said something about, like, in terms of there being some kind of dichotomy between what we give to nature and what we give to other humans, and there being only a limited amount that we can allocate for each. She says that, love doesn't work like that. It's not a hydraulic fluid that's used up as, in fact, it increases the more you use it. So, the more we listen, I think, to our non-human kin, the better we can listen to our human kin. I'm gonna read this next. I just want to hit the next question. It'll be our last question, unfortunately, for tonight. I need to learn to talk more quickly. I apologize. But this is from Courtney. She says, I would like to more deeply connect to a sense of place where I live. Could the panelists share some of their favorite methodologies for connecting to place where they are? And when they're traveling, how to best connect to and respect the place you're coming into for the first time? Thank you for that question, Courtney. It's a really good question. So that is, what are some of the methods that you find that ground you in place, is the question to share with Courtney. Lisa, you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Sure. I think one thing that I've found lately, because I've been thinking about how to get into I've been thinking about that sort of the dance of life, right? I watch these mountains and watch the clouds go by and how we are part of this dance of life. And so one of the things that I do and have been trying to do more is simply wake up at dawn and listen to the birds and really attune myself to listening to the birds. And I think about what it is that I need to hear. And one of the things that happened earlier this year, which was so powerful to me, was I've been able to listen to COVID, kind of the waves of COVID come and go through our city with the early morning ambulances that come through. And so I can tell when there's a COVID spike in our city because there's more ambulances early in the morning. And this one morning, I woke up very early. I think it was probably 4 or 4:30. It was dark. And it started with one bird calling, and the bird was calling and calling. And the bird sounded really worried, like there was this sort of worried sound to the bird. And then there was a dog started barking, and the dog was as well a concerned sound of this dog barking. And then a little while later, the ambulance came. And I was just so moved because I felt like the animals were telling us that, this heartbreak was coming, that they could hear the ambulance coming, and they were telling each other. And during this time too, I feel like animals have really stepped up. I mean, the pets have really stepped up, and that's one way of connecting to places, really both domestic animals and animals that are there, is listening to them and hearing them. And I've just been so attuned during this time as how different dogs and cats and birds seem to be caring for us in this moment of great suffering that we're going through.
Thank you, Lisa. Diane, I would like to get you to jump in here, maybe with the last word. And if other folks want to leave your own sort of methodologies of listening or of connecting to place, whether you're at home or traveling, could you drop it in the chat just real quick while Diane is speaking to this? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gavin. I was thinking about something that Art had said about get to know your neighbors, bring a pie over. And that applies to the place where you live as well. So get to know your neighbors. What are the trees that that you're living with? Who else is there? Like Lisa was saying, who are the birds that are singing in the morning? I like to go out and look at where's the water and how does it change between seasons, so that it's in one place in the spring, and by late summer, it may not be there again. So it's really getting acquainted with all of your neighbors, and remembering that you are just one of a community.
Well said, Diane. And I appreciate this time to get connected, even if it has to be through a screen at this moment, to you all. And I thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the folks that were involved in the chat. My dog is just licking me incessantly. So to Lisa's point, hello. I want to remind everybody to visit Point Reyes Books website and see when the next dates are for our Kinship series. We're going to keep doing this, and visit Center for Humans and Nature if you can. And I want to give a really special thanks to all you contributors who made the music for this book and made it sing. So thank you so much for being here, and appreciate you all. Let us make sacred together as we go forth. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Or have a good day.
Good night, everybody. And thank you, Stephen, if you're still there somewhere in the background, the Wizard of Oz.
Enrique, te mando abrazos. We need to talk soon.
Thank you, everybody.